Solving quadratic equations by square roots. We've already learned two methods for solving quadratic equations. Solving by graphing, where we found the x-intercepts of the graph, and solving by factoring, where we factored the quadratic equation, set each factor equal to 0, and solved. Today's method is solving by square roots. Solving by square roots does not work in every single quadratic equation. In fact, it only works in a select few. The ones that it works in are of the form ax squared plus c equals 0. So if you'll notice, there is no bx term in the middle. So solving by square roots only works when there is no b term in the middle. Here are the steps to solve by square roots. Step number 1, isolate the x squared. So as I look at this equation, x squared minus 49 equals 0, the very first thing I need to do is I need to get the x squared all by itself. So in order to do that, I need to add 49 to both sides. So I'm left with x squared equals 49. My x squared is by itself. Now I'm going to take the square root of both sides. So the inverse operation of squaring is square rooting. Remember that a positive number always has two square roots. So I'm trying to figure out what I square to get 49. I can square positive 7 and negative 7. So when we square root both sides, we want to include the positive and the negative. How I'd like to see this written is x equals, we'll do our bracket notation like we did with factoring, and you can write it 7 comma negative 7, but an easier way is plus or minus 7. Okay, that represents positive 7 and negative 7. Let's take a look at the examples. The directions say find the solutions of the following quadratic equations by square roots. X squared plus 16 equals 0. Step number 1, isolate the x squared. So to do that, we add 16 to both sides. That gives us x squared equals 16. My x squared is isolated, so then I can move to step 2, which is square rooting both sides. Don't forget the positive and the negative. So my solutions are positive 4 and negative 4, because positive 4 squared is 16 and negative 4 squared is 16. Number 2, x squared plus 25 equals 0. Let's get the x squared by itself. Subtract 25 from both sides. That gives us x squared equals negative 25. My x squared is isolated, so I will square root both sides. Don't forget the plus or minus. What can you square to get negative 25? Well, if I square 5, I get positive 25. If I square negative 5, I still get positive 25. In our world of Algebra 1, there are no numbers that we can square to get negative 25. You'll investigate that more in Algebra 2 with imaginary numbers. So for our purposes, because no number squared equal negative 25, my answer is no solution. You can either write that as the 0 with the slash through it, or write the phrase no solution. Number 3, this may seem confusing because it has an equals 81, but all I need to still do is focus on step 1, get the x squared by itself. So to isolate the x squared, we subtract 7 from both sides. that gives me x squared equals 74. My x squared is isolated, so now I can square root both sides with a plus or minus. Do you know what you square to get 74? Well, because it's not an integer, we are going to leave our answers as plus or minus the square root of 74. I don't know what the square root of 74 is. I'm not using my calculator to approximate a decimal, so I leave my answer exact as the positive and negative square root of 74. Number 4. This one is going to require 2 steps to get the x squared by itself. Step number 1 is to add 45 to both sides. Notice my x squared is still not isolated, so I have another step to do that, and that is dividing both sides by 5. So x squared is equal to 9. Now that I've isolated the x squared, I can take the square root of both sides. Don't forget the plus or minus. The square root of 9 is 3 and negative 3. So my solutions are the positive and negative square root of 3. Take a moment to work through 5 and 6. Select pause, work through 5 and 6, and then come back to check. I hope number 5 didn't trip you up too much. We add 16 to both sides and then divide both sides by 9. Because I can't divide 16 by 9 to get a whole number, we're going to leave that as a fraction. Then we take the square root of both sides. When you take the square root of a fraction, that is equivalent to taking the square root of the numerator divided by the square root of the denominator. Well, both 16 and 9 are perfect squares, so this makes it nice and easy. The square root of 16 is 4, and the square root of 9 is 3. So plus or minus 4/3. Number 6, our final answer is x equals plus or minus the square root of 3. Select pause to work through 7 and 8. Remember, step 1 is to always get the x squared by itself. Compare your answers for questions 7 and 8.